Thank you so much for inviting me here today. Philanthropy New Zealand, the J.R. Mackenzie Trust Center for Social Impact for organizing this really important program. It's such a treat for me to be back in New Zealand. I lived here for 4 years, and it holds such a special place in my heart. And just flying into Auckland from Australia, I've been on a speaking tour in Australia with the Australian Centre for Social Innovation, Philanthropy Australia, and Perpetual, and around systems change. And it's just been amazing. I was in 4 cities there, and then just to end the trip this way and spend some personal time with my dearest, oldest friends. I'm really, really thrilled to be here. And, funding advocacy for social impact has been core to the Tao Foundation's strategy. And so sharing the experiences of how we've learned and methods that we've used is really a great joy for me. And really my journey to lead my family's foundation was not, like our path to funding advocacy was not a straight line. I was given this opportunity 25 years ago when my parents invited me to become the first staff person of the Tao Foundation. And, since then I've really relied on the wise counsel of my partners in foundations big and small around New York and Connecticut, where we're based, around the United States and around the world. We've done a lot of experimentation, and we've had some failures that we've really learned from. And we've also been part of some really big wins. I've really learned on the go, and I've had incredible support from my board of directors and encouragement along the way. And so I'm really excited to share a few of the strategies that we've learned. But a little history first. So these are my parents, Claire and Leonard Tao. And they began their giving really informally, long before there was a Tao Foundation. They have a true American dream story. They were born on the eve of the Great Depression into families that were really struggling. They just had barely enough to survive. But they had the opportunity at that time to get a free college education through the City University of New York, and they met at Brooklyn College in 1948 and fell in love. So there were a lot of years of struggle ahead for them, but eventually they had a family and they built a very successful business in the cable television and cellular telephone industries. And quite unexpectedly, they found themselves so much more fortunate than all of their friends and neighbors and people who they grew up with. So their initial philanthropy was paying off people's credit card debts, paying college tuition for friends, medical bills, they were just so grateful for their own good fortune, and they felt it was out of proportion compared to, they worked hard, but they felt very lucky, and they felt this incredible, strong obligation to give back. So in 1988, they formed the Tao Foundation as a vehicle both to give more formally, but also to do it as a family. That sense of obligation to help others, and not just to help others, but to help people achieve success in their own lives the way that they had done, has really been guiding our family's philanthropy ever since. And you might not be able to see this, but there's a little quote from my mom there that says, "All we had was each other and our shared determination to change things for the better." And the foundation has grown really tremendously over the last 30 plus years, both financially and staff-wise. And our strategy has evolved because the world has changed a lot during that period of time. But those values that guide our work have remained the same. So embedded in those values, we are committed to these 4 pillars. The first is fostering a culture of entrepreneurship. My parents were entrepreneurs. They built their business on a wing and a prayer and a few $100s around the dining room table. And so we take chances on people and organizations, even though the risk of failure might be quite high. The next is supporting new ideas and innovation. So we see a lot of creative solutions to society's most challenging problems. But sometimes innovation is not a brand new idea, it's just funding it for the first time. There are a lot of great ideas out there that have not been invested in before, so it doesn't always have to be that bright, shiny object that we're chasing. The next pillar is encouraging and facilitating collaboration. That collaboration is kind of jargony now in our field, but we really value collective thinking because we know that no one person or organization can come up with the best ideas alone. And the last pillar is really around transformation. My parents saw that the opportunities they had really transformed their lives. And so we provide people with access and opportunities for them to help them transform their own lives. So following these guideposts, and I remind my staff all the time, we follow these both internally and externally. It's not just about the work we do. There was a point Rachel made about we need to self-reflect and see what are our processes. Are we actually making it harder for the organizations we're trying to support with all of our ridiculous applications and questions? But, I think believing in people and ideas, seeking new discovery, collective thinking for problem solving and transforming lives and systems are, really core to the Tao Foundation's work. And our commitment to asking questions and continually learning and trying to do better is really embedded in the DNA of our organization and has really guided us in all of our program areas, access to education and the arts, seeking justice for young people, and trying to reform our country's most broken systems. So although it wasn't intentional at first, we quickly learned that participating in and supporting advocacy efforts would be essential if we were really going to have big impact with our relatively small amount of funds. So, what is advocacy is a big, we're throwing this word around, and it can be kind of like a dirty word. Sometimes people don't like it. They feel uncomfortable. They think they come in thinking they know what it is. So I thought it would be important to just explore that. It was mentioned there's so many different ways of being an advocate, but to me, advocacy is the act of building public support for a particular cause or policy change. It doesn't have any of the, it doesn't have to be lobbying. It doesn't have to be grassroots organizing. It can take many, many forms, and that can range from the really on-the-ground organizing, protests, things like that, movement building, but it can also be the dissemination of academic research, getting data out there to decision makers. So as was noted in this fantastic report, advocacy can take the form, I just put a quote here, of individuals and groups of people who may be gathering in networks or coalitions to develop an opinion about a social issue, to work to find evidence to support their stance on that issue, and then share this evidence with those who are in positions to make changes. So that doesn't sound like something we're not allowed to do, right? Yet, it's really amazing how many, and someone said before that in the US there's all this funding of advocacy. No, it's small. There are very few of us who are really out at the forefront of that, and I think our field is still really dominated by direct service support, which is also really important. I'm not making a judgment on that, but so in defining advocacy, I've these are what I consider the basic action steps. The first one is define an issue or a problem. And then next, find a story of an individual or the community related to that problem. And then take that story, that narrative, and bring it to some sort of forum or group of people who care. And that can spark a movement for reform, especially when you get people coming from different viewpoints and but have a shared interest. And then, investing in evidence-based research to validate those needed reforms, I think is a key that also we sometimes leave that behind or leave to others. And then lastly, it's really informing and educating policymakers and the public. We really need to change hearts and minds. I mean, policymakers are dependent on their constituencies that they serve, and so we need people to care. So, why should we fund advocacy? As a foundation, our primary business is giving grants to nonprofit organizations. So that's our really unique place in society. And we see it as our responsibility at the Tao Foundation to use that platform to do the best possible job we could do to influence public good. But if we want to help more than small groups of individuals, we really need to look at the public systems that affect them. So the question really for all of us is, how can we go beyond simply grant making? And along the way, I have really learned to be a student of the issues that we care about, and then also understand the greater landscape, the context in which they sit. Get to know the specifics about the population, and then try to look at the systems that are causing inequity. Why do some people have access to health care and others don't? Why do some people get locked up in the criminal justice system and others get a free pass? So with the goal to reform the juvenile justice systems in the state of Connecticut, the Tao Foundation, has had to support a full range of advocacy strategies. We get involved with both funding these groups and also by actively participating in the work they do. We really learned that you could only have a very limited influence on policy reform through the transactional giving that our foundations are generally set up to do. Yet most foundations they operate with this big wall between funder and grantee. And they have very little contact with the communities that those organizations serve, and they often have no contact with the government leaders or system leaders who are actually making the biggest investments. I mean, even the biggest foundation is going to be just a drop in the bucket. I mean, it's really government that we need to work with, because they're bringing out the big budgets in these areas. So in order to give our philanthropic funds effectively, we've learned that it's really, really essential to build relationships, and not only with the people who are our allies and the people whose work we believe in, but also the people who could potentially get in the way of any reform. So when the Tao Foundation built our strategy on youth justice, we did not just meet with fellow reformers and people, all of our allies and advocates. We also met with judges, prosecutors, police chiefs, prison wardens, and we really needed to understand their priorities. And we asked them, how could we be of help to you? How could a small foundation getting involved in this work, help you do your job better? And through that process, we started to build trust. That was another point that came up. I mean, that trust building, the relationships over time. And those people, first they saw us as adversaries. Why are you poking your nose in our business? They got defensive. But over time, when we kept coming back and saying, yes, we understand how hard your job is. I mean, we just would like to help and learn more. So one of the most effective reform strategies that I've learned in this work is to foster partnership among people who generally work on opposite sides of an issue, and really creating a space for them to come together and work towards shared goals. So an example of how this has worked for us. So at the Tao Foundation, we were interested in the idea of using restorative justice techniques in lieu of punishment for young people. Now, actually, New Zealand is sort of ahead of the world in using family group conferencing and other methods as diversion from court for young people. And I've actually learned a lot from New Zealand in this area. And so our goal at the Tao Foundation was to integrate and fund mediation between those who had committed crimes and the victims of those crimes in order to find a resolution and hold the the person who committed the crime accountable, but also to help the victim feel safe. So done well, mediation results in much deeper accountability for the offender and a much more security and safety for the victim. And it's proven to be way more effective than punishment and much less expensive than incarceration. Yet it was extremely difficult for us to get mediation integrated into our youth justice system. So my challenge was to figure out how could the Tao Foundation be a lever for solving this problem. It didn't matter that we had the money to make a grant in this area. Nobody wanted to take that grant, and we couldn't figure out how to get it actually incorporated. So interestingly, when I spoke to prosecutors and juvenile defenders separately, there was actually a lot of agreement on the benefits of mediation, but they had only ever met in court when they were on opposite sides, and they had absolutely no awareness of these shared interests. So I decided, well, I'm going to host a lunch and invite the prosecutors and the defenders. And I mean, my goal was to have them come to a shared agreement about advocating for mediation in the court system, but I did not impose that agenda on the lunch. I really just simply created time and space for them to share a meal. You know, breaking bread together is very powerful. And the group kind of naturally began to connect. And they let down their guard on those sort of courtroom postures. And through this, they were really able to discover, without too much prompting from the Tao Foundation, I mean, we did bring up mediation and we talked about it, but they basically came to the agreement together that they all shared, they thought that mediation was an excellent strategy to divert youth from the justice system and also help victims feel safe. So the unexpected outcome is that people laughed, they shared personal things about their personal lives with each other, they talked about their own lives and why they got into the work. And I mean, this later helped them work really collaboratively on cases for the very first time. And so as a foundation, we really have the power to bring people together to find common ground. And in this case, the result was integration of mediation into the juvenile justice system. And the outcome was really diverting thousands of young people from court. And so we may not think about things like activities like this as advocacy, but I hope this has sort of illustrated how a strategy like this can work. And in the photo we have here, this is Judge Norco, and this young lady had been chronically absent from school. So she was involved in the court system for chronic truancy, basically. She had been ordered to go to school, but she had not been going to school. And it turns out that she, in meeting with her prosecutor and the defender meeting together, brought this to the judge, and he actually came to her school and found out that she had sickle cell anemia, which is a devastating illness, and that her parents were really struggling. They just didn't know how to communicate with the school. She was always homesick, really unpacked the issue and built a relationship between school, young person, school, judge, prosecutor, defender, and they actually really came out with a wonderful outcome for this young person. So another example from our work, and Tanya will know this well because she came to the U.S. and we got together with our Connecticut Juvenile Justice Alliance, which was really fantastic. So I mentioned earlier, that the Tao Foundation, my parents' interests really were around education, arts and culture, medical research, but over inviting their children onto the board, we got much more interested in social justice issues and we kind of took for granted the things that they struggled for. So we definitely didn't set out to specialize in juvenile justice. I mean, our interest was very broad in helping disadvantaged youth and families and problem solving in underserved communities. And it really could have gone in any direction. We could have focused on homelessness, mental health, access to employment, housing. We only had a small amount of money to give away, so we really needed to find our niche. And when I became aware for the first time of young people caught up in the justice system, I saw this real opportunity to have a big impact with our small resources. Now, I'm not a lawyer. Nobody on our staff had been trained as experts in this area, and we went into the work without any kind of preconceived notions and bias, and that turned out to be a huge asset. Our curiosity and our lack of bias really helped build trust with people in the criminal justice system. And we started funding organizations that had solely gotten government funding before, so it allowed them to be creative and flexible for the first time. And my board and my staff, we all kind of learned alongside the advocates. And through that work, a very powerful collaborative evolved. Supporting networks and coalitions has been one of the most important strategies for us at the Tao Foundation. So these early informal meetings with advocates when we were trying to do our R&D on, where could our niche be, and we learned about kids involved in the court system, kids who are literally being thrown away. The first time I went into a detention facility and I saw a 13-year-old girl in a cell, I thought that, we have to do something about this. There's something seriously wrong going on here. And now kids in cages are more in the news, but we've been doing it for decades in the United States. And I have visited facilities here in New Zealand and in Australia as well. And we take bad ideas and we follow each other. So there was a lot of work to be done in this area. But anyway, so when we were first doing this work, we met with advocates, children's advocates. They were not specific to justice. They were doing education rights, child protection, other areas. And we found that there was no one place to all gather and talk about juvenile justice. And so the Tao Foundation started sort of hosting a monthly conversation. And eventually that formed into this coalition called the Connecticut Juvenile Justice Alliance. And the Tao Foundation paid for the very first part-time organizer for this group, and it really became the force behind every major legislative change that happened in our state. And the results have impacted thousands and thousands of children who have now been diverted from the court system in Connecticut. When I first started doing this research in 1998, Connecticut, which is a tiny little progressive state, was the leading incarcerator of children in the entire nation. We had more children per capita locked up than any other state, and our age of criminal responsibility was 16. So all of these kids were 15 and younger. So this is a shameful statistic. But I have to say, 2 decades later, we are now the lowest incarcerator of children in the country, and we were the first state to close our youth prison. And so this work, these young people are rallying up at our Capitol to raise the age from 16 to 18. I can't even estimate how many children have been offered a better future through the ripple effect of this work. And I really do consider this our proudest accomplishment as a foundation. And we've both been, supporting and participating in the group. So we don't take a lot of credit for everything, because we are just a minor player in this work. Advocacy towards systems change, collaboration is absolutely key ingredient. And, there's a lot of ways that we can work to engage with others. We really need to listen, meet with experts, do site visits, fund research, meet with directly affected people. We have to help define the problem and then, find the opportunity for change. Listening, super important. A lot of times we listen to people, we already have the answer that we think, in our head, and, we have to actually listen deeply and then follow through on what we hear. Sharing through the convening, facilitating, participating in local and national coalitions, writing opinion pieces, getting our word, communication strategy, what we try to get in the media, the solutions, stories about solutions, things that are working, how to scale those. Those networks and strategies are so important. And then, of course, investing in leadership. We're not going to come in from the outside and fix things. We need to offer training and education for directly impacted populations so that they can go on to be the next generation of leaders. And then, lastly, really inspiring through education, getting the word out, leveraging our successes, building momentum. That's the only way we're going to have really social change on any kind of grand scale. So our partners are varied. We, being a hands-on contributing member of dynamic groups made up of advocates, nonprofits, system leaders, that's been a real key to the Tao Foundation's success in influencing systems reform. And, we are in a unique position as foundations. We have the freedom, the credibility, the authority to bring our issue to the forefront. I mean, when I invited prosecutors and defenders to lunch, they all came. We need to use the power of our platform. And, whether we earned it or not, we have that credibility. So that's an incredible and powerful tool. And we can use that to serve as a broker between public and private stakeholders, between system leaders and directly affected community members who have no platform for their voice. So just a couple of results. Building success in the state of Connecticut that I mentioned, after that, we really set out to scale our impact. And by using that experience to influence reform on New York, which is a much bigger and more complex system. So when we first got into this work, basically total failure rate for incarceration, 89% of young people who went into our system returned. It was totally inefficient, almost $300,000 a year to lock up a child. Think about what you could give a child or a family instead of that. And our facilities were seriously unsafe. It was the most dangerous place for a young person, and there was actually, they were under federal investigation in New York. So, these posed real challenges. But the thing about the unsafe facilities actually helped us too, because it wasn't just unsafe for the children, it was unsafe for the people who worked there. It was a toxic environment for corrections officers. It's really clear that no single intervention is going to solve this very, very serious problem. So scaling up one rehabilitation provider, changing one law, re-engineering one state agency, it was not going to cut it. So through a concerted effort working with multiple stakeholders and a variety of advocates, we began to see a lot of incredible results. And since we've been involved in this work, we've seen actually higher than that now, 50% drop in arrests, 50% drop of kids in detention. And in 2017, we successfully also raised the age to 18 in New York. Lessons learned, never overlook the possibility of working together with the people who may not share your values or your goals. If you don't consult them and get their buy-in, then they could cause a serious roadblock to your success. And I've been really surprised by the potential of coming up with shared goals amongst people who are on opposite sides of an issue or really have very conflicting opinions. We can't do this work alone, and this is our moment when we raise the age. This is our governor in New York, and You know, the best part about working together with people who you don't necessarily agree with is that you get to celebrate the success then together. And there's nothing more long-lasting than having people who can all take credit for something positive that's changed. So I'm going to just go super quickly through. I like to end my presentations with the tips and traps that I've learned along the way. These are mine. I'm not imposing on you that you're doing anything wrong, but I have some things that I have to follow to make sure that I don't do more harm than good. So I'm going to start with the don'ts. So I think it's really important not to approach problem solving thinking that you have the answer or necessarily that you even need to have the answer. You know, sometimes the best solutions are totally unexpected. And, you know, we have to also here be aware of our unconscious bias and preconceived notions. We all have them. We bring them to the table with us, so we need to own them and admit it and say, look, I might say the wrong thing. I come from my own perspective. Please, you know, help me learn. I think the biggest mistake we can do in designing a plan to reform is not including people who have direct experience. So we always have scholars and system leaders and even community providers, but these are not the only experts, and we're not the only experts for sure. So, you know, who would know better how to change a system than someone who had actually experienced it? But I have to say these voices are, sometimes there's like one token person on a commission, but they're often left out or completely forgotten. So, you know, I mentioned never overlook the possibility of working together with your adversaries towards shared goals. Guess what? Positive youth outcomes and public safety are interdependent. When kids are doing better, our communities are safer. When our communities are safer, kids are doing better. So guess what? Community providers and youth advocates and police officers actually have some of the same goals. And then I mentioned, you know, we also get to celebrate together, which is very important. And lastly, like always remember that you have this special place in the world where you have credibility and access where others do not. There's a huge opportunity for us to use this platform, and whether it's convenings or facilitating, but creating a real platform for people, you know, the voiceless populations to be heard. So I'll just finish up with some of my personal mantras about how I do my work. You know, we consider ourselves a small foundation. You know, maybe, you know, we're investing about $5.5 million a year in justice reform work now, and that's just youth justice, adult criminal justice, children with incarcerated parents. And, you know, we're playing with a lot of big foundations in the States who are giving away, you know, tens of millions or more. So the idea is, you know, you can start small, but you have to start somewhere. Just go for it. I mean, you can actually really leverage very small investments for big change. The next is really to always be open and curious, to actively listen. You know, I mentioned this is one of the hardest disciplines because you know, I just have to stay vigilant about it because I go in, I only come with my own frame, and if I want to build trust, I you know, really need to pay a lot of attention to this. The next one was also mentioned, you know, being adaptive and flexible. The first thing you try may not work, so we have to be willing to course correct. But the other thing is, when things are working, why not go bolder? Why not double the amount? I mean, we're so tied to our processes. Oh, we already gave a grant this year, whatever. But if you see amazing opportunity, why not double down? Why not say we're going to make a grant in the middle of the year and double our impact on that? I think it's a very rare practice. And, you know, last thing is you know, relationships are what make everything else happen. We have to put them first. We can't do this work alone. You know, I have found the power of this collective action is really the only way we're going to achieve any kind of large-scale social change. And, you know, when you build trust and relationship, it's, you know, anything can happen. So thank you so much for inviting me to share a bit about the Tao Foundation and our path to supporting advocacy. These are some of our publications. We're on all the social media channels. I do want to say that all of our communications show young people looking hopeful, doing productive things. If I see another report with a kid in handcuffs or in a jumpsuit, I mean, we cannot be perpetuating these negative images. So I really encourage you to write and speak and promote people doing positive things and moving forward in their lives. I think we have an obligation as foundations, and we don't think about that as part of a strategy.